All right, welcome back over to Jface Games. Today we're talking about mini games. And so what does that mean? Well, in my system, what I'm trying to do currently is I'm trying to have 4 big classes, and then within each of those 4 classes, 3 subclasses, and all of it fits on a character sheet. And I think I have an example of a character sheet here. Let me go ahead and pull that up so that people can see that example. So here's an example of a character sheet for the warrior that I was working on. There's a whole video about that. But in essence, what you have is that on your turn, you're going to be doing your main action, you get a move, and then you get a tactical action. But you also have this quote-unquote mini game that exists for each of the different classes. So this is the mini game for the warrior. It's a stances mini game, right? Now, what do I want the mini game to do in this? Oh, nailing mine. So I don't want it to add a lot of cognitive load. I want it to be a fun little toy that you're playing with. I want it to flavor your turn in some way, but not necessarily be your turn, right? I think that the tactical action, to me, is where a lot of the quote-unquote decision-making is going to be like, what do I want to do this turn in terms of how am I supporting? Because you're always getting an attack automatically, and you're always getting a move, so you know you're attacking. The question is, how am I supporting either the team or myself with my tactical action? Now, so that's tactical actions. Tactical actions are what I think should be the cognitive load part of your turn. Your actual abilities that you get for your actual subclass, I like to think of these powers as things that alter specific tactics, passives that are always on, that are flavorful. Those are the 2 categories that these kind of fall under, and then occasionally one of these is a new tactic that you get. So when I think about these subclasses, or these subclass powers, I think of them as altering current tactics, adding a new tactic, but hopefully that new tactic isn't like I'm doing this every turn because this is obviously the best choice. And then potentially giving you some other random passive that affects other things you're doing, right? So that's how I think about these powers. So now, given that, you have the tactical actions technically should be your most cognitive load, and your powers that you're getting are giving you sort of like flavor. That should set the stage for what the mini game should be, right? And so far, I have no idea what's going to happen today. This is me brainstorming in order to kind of get ideas out there. Now, I have an idea already for the warrior, their sort of idea, right? So the warrior, this is, by the way, for those that are going to ask in the comments, this is Escaladral, I think it's called, Escaladral inside Obsidian. So that's what I'm using right now. So the warrior, their sort of tactic or their mini game is going to be their stances, right? And so what does stances look like? In essence, this is what it would look like. I'm just going to quickly draw this out, where you have something like this. And let's go ahead and let's move over here. So the warrior is going to have something like this. And in essence, what this is going to look like is you're going to have, this is the equivalent of rage. This is the equivalent of aggressive. This is balanced. This is tactical. This is, I don't know what it's going to be called, but it's the seeker ability, right? And then down here you have defensive, right? And so what you end up with is that you end up with, this is going to be technically both directions. And you're going to be ending up with this, but then this also goes this way, and this also goes this way. And then here's the special one that kind of goes, tactician can go like that, and this, and here. And then this one comes back this way, this one comes back this way. Right? Something like that. And then the other thing I'm thinking about doing is the seeker one is more like this, right? So, not 100% sure. Now, so what does this mean? Well, the mini game here is, think of it yourself having a little token, and that little token exists on the board. And I don't know if you can color things in this. Maybe you can, but it doesn't look like it. You probably can. I'm on the fly. So in essence, you have this token on the board of sorts, and it sits somewhere, and it probably starts at balanced. And then on your turn, at any point in time on your turn, so it's either after all your actions or before your actions, you can move it once, right? So you're going to move it in one direction, and it has to go across the lines. Now, if you are a tactician, you have access to this, otherwise you don't. If you're a seeker, you have access to this, otherwise you don't. If you're a fury, you have access to this, otherwise you don't, right? That's the draw. This is obviously going to make it so you can hit harder but do less damage. This is sort of a little bonus to both because you're a warrior or you're better at melee than others. This is you don't hit as hard but you do more damage. And then these are going to be different sort of flavors to that. Now, what it is the other little challenge you have is that on your turn, sort of the two things that happen here is that any time on your turn you can move it once, and then the follow-up to that is also only one spot, but if you spend your tactical action, you can move it anywhere available, right? Meaning that if you're if you've got it here and you are a fury, you can burn your tactical action, which means you're not getting that amazing choice, but you can throw this all the way up. Whoops. You can throw that all the way up to the rage spot before you then take your attack, right? And then you take your attack. So anyways, that is the idea of the mini game that exists for the warrior class. Now, let's talk about the other mini games, which I have not created yet, but we're going to talk through them right now. So now a mini game potentially for the rogue is that you have this resource called risk, right? And I can't zoom in that much more. So you have this resource called risk, and I have no idea how it's going to be used, but here are some ideas thus far. The ideas thus far is that this is much more of a resource pool, right? Whereas the last one, that was not a resource pool. That was you've got this thing you're moving and sliding, so you have a decision. This one's more of a resource pool, and the hope is that you do risky stuff. When risk increases, you are potentially more vulnerable, but with high risk, you can then burn it to do damage, right? So I'm trying to think of the idea of this is how the rogue class backstabs, in essence. So my first thought is we use something like the panic system from Mothership, right? Where it's this idea that panic goes up, you make checks. If you roll under your panic, you get a negative effect, right? So that's one idea, is that you're using this panic system, because then you can think of risk as okay, your risk is building, which means you're going to be able to burn it at some point in time to do something awesome. But as long as it's building, whenever you have to make these rolls, if that roll goes under it, then a negative effect happens. That's one idea, right? Problem. Well, the problem would potentially be that we don't want to add too much fiddliness, right? Is rolling a die going to be an extra step of fiddliness, right? And that's not a real word, but I love it, so we're using it. Fiddliness. All right, maybe it is a real word. Is it a real word? Fiddly-dope. So that's one thought. The other thing I have in mind for this is that team actions. I don't really love this. Oh, let me say this. Tactical actions have different flavors, i.e. risky or safe, right? Then you have this concept of on the rogue's character sheet or playbook, the tactical actions are colored differently, right? You just have a quick coloration just to make it known that certain tactical actions are safe, certain ones are risky. What does that mean? Well, that means that anytime you do a safe tactical action, I thought about this, doing risky tactical actions increases risk. Super simple. Doing, and this is where it's how tough you want to make this, doing safe tactical actions either so doesn't increase risk or resets risk. And I kind of like that idea a little bit. I'm not going to lie. Having this sort of reset of risk, right? So this is one way that this might end up working, is that you have, in essence, some sort of like, who knows, like some sort of risk meter, right? And you've got this risk meter that kind of, I don't know how many spots it would be, and it kind of just fills up. And then what ends up happening is that as you're moving along, there is, maybe it's a D6, right? Super simple. Maybe it's, what the other idea I like is that you make it a 2D6 roll, have a below 6, above 8, and then a 6, 7, 8 area, right? So you make this very quick, easy little like graph. And in essence, you're rolling these 2d6 and it feels like gambling. So you've got this other mechanic where it feels like you're playing craps in essence. And this is kind of playing on the idea of Space Base, where if you've never played the board game Space Base, it's all about, you're in essence building your own base of space stations, and it's numbers between 2 and 12, and you're setting different things at different areas on that, and you're in essence banking on the fact that people are going to be rolling certain numbers below or above 7 and that kind of stuff, right? So you're playing with the odds. And so this might be another way of having a mini game that has these like 3 ranges, or maybe it's only 5 ranges, right? Maybe you've got something like this, right? And this exists, and then this is like, this is just straight up 7. This is like 5 to 6. This is like 8 to 9, right? And then this is 2 to 4. And this is 10 to 12. So this is now getting away from the idea of, this is getting totally away from the idea of the panic system up here. But maybe this could be a fun little thing. The question being, how much time, like how often do you make these, how often is this mini game played, right? How often are you playing the mini game for the rogue? Whereas we already know that the tactician, they're doing their mini game every turn, but it's fast. It's very quick. It just does a whoop, move it, and that's it, right? The rogue, how often are you playing this mini game? How quickly is it occurring? And once again, is it this sort of, you're trying to do these ranks, or are you setting up this sort of panic system? And maybe what it is, here we're spitballing now, maybe it's accrue, I don't know how you spell this, accrue risk, right? Certain tactical actions build risk. Certain tactical actions trigger risk checks, right? So it's like, what tactical action would this potentially be? I'm going to try to evade, right? I'm trying to evade something, or I'm trying to withdraw, right? So maybe evade, withdraw, maneuver, I don't know. Maybe certain ones, or maybe they're very good ones that exist in the rogue subclass. So it's like the breeze has a very interesting maybe tactic they can use, but it's a high-risk maneuver. So what happens is if you ever use that, you now have to make the risk check. And depending on what your risk is at, you are now going to try to roll under it with 2d6 or something, right? The question being that now what do you get to use your risk for? Like, what's the benefit of the risk? And the benefit for the risk in my brain is risk spent for extra damage. That's it so far. Or extra tactical action. That would be massive. So maybe at some point in time, this comes into play, where it's like, depending on the levels, so it'd be like thresholds, where it's if you risk 0 to 4, nothing. Once it gets to 4, now you can do extra damage. I don't know how it works, but the idea, this is the budding idea. I'd love to hear your thoughts. All right, next one. Let's keep moving. The next one is the Zealot, right? So this is your, in essence, what would be your paladin, kind of druidy kind of person, your cleric. And the idea here, it's another resource, right? So I've got 2 that are resources, 2 that are sort of these mini games. I'd be curious what other people think in terms of, is there a different type of mini game that you think would be interesting? So what is the Zealot? Well, the Zealot, this was actually an idea proposed by Prof in our Discord channel, and I thought was pretty cool, is that the idea that they use faith as a resource, faith resource. And that the faith resource, their idea was more the concept that faith is built up when things are going poorly, right? It's the idea that you still have faith in the face of despair, right? So the easy way to do this is that gain points, gain faith with each miss by teammates, right? That would be the easiest thing to say, because then you could just say that, yeah, your team, anytime someone misses an attack or anytime someone fails an attempt at something, then you gain a faith point. And I would say that this would be one way of gaining it, but I don't know how many misses are actually going to happen in this game, because I'm kind of getting away from the idea of checks. There's going to be some checks, obviously, but I don't know if there's going to be enough of them to feel good about this. And also, is this a fun mini game? Is there choices being made by the character each round in order to use this faith, right? Meaning that the warrior's doing something every turn, it feels like. The rogue is potentially having to think about which tactics they want to use in terms of what stuff they want to do that's risky or not risky. The other thing I should say up here is that there should be something in terms of like certain RP will also build it. Meaning, like, if you put yourself in harm's way, it's not a tactical action, but you're like, I'm going to swing from this and go there, you're gaining risk, right? There's certain RP there. So the rogue is really thinking about thematically what they're doing on a turn and how that potentially builds or decreases their risk. So faith, one idea being that it's built on things going poorly, but you still have the faith that things will go well, right? So that's gaining faith when each player misses. What are some things you could do to faith? Faith would be, in essence, bonuses for you or allies. Increased heals, right? All this kind of stuff. I think it's just a useful resource. Is that boring? Maybe. Uses for faith. I mean, maybe it should be more in terms of like affecting enemy die rolls, i.e. the divination from 5e, right? That makes a little bit of faith kind of concept. Maybe you just tap into that whole idea altogether, and maybe it's maybe faith is a die that is rolled and switched out, and it's constantly being switched and moved around the table. Maybe faith is a mobile die, right? Maybe faith is a mobile die that is being moved and passed around. Moved around. Maybe that's what faith is? That's getting interesting to me. I like the idea that faith is a potential, like a divination die. But that's powerful. Those divination dice are super powerful. So you couldn't have that constantly out. I mean, the good thing is maybe you could, because maybe it's only 1d6, and a lot of the game is based on a 2d6 system. So swapping in that 1d6 for a different d6, but then you're getting a crappy d6 to do something with later. I could see a lot of people gaming that, though, and always just using it on a miss, right? So it's like, oh, I've got this one divination die, and you're already missing. So let me just go ahead and swap this one for one of your high die, because it's going to give us a more powerful die later. Is that gaming? Yeah. I'm okay with it being gaming, but then it's not fun. Like, then it's almost, there's no decisions, right? Maybe the decision is when to get rid of it, but then I don't want a resource. What do we want to avoid? Want to avoid. We want to. We want to avoid no real decision, meaning it's always obvious, and we want to avoid no real decision, and then feeling like you don't want to spend it, right? Meaning that if you've got one that's a D6, you don't want to get rid of it because, oh, is this the next thing we're going to need it for? Like, I would hate that players would quarterback. Other players might quarterback your use of a faith die. Quarterbacking in board game world is that usually in a cooperative game, one player will just be telling everyone else what to do, and that would be a shitty experience. And so, yeah, there's some interesting ideas here. What else could it be? It's not a die. Maybe it's bonuses. Does it have to be a resource? Maybe it doesn't have to be a resource. Maybe this one doesn't have to be a resource. Maybe this is something else. Right? Where it's, you are, maybe there's something about auto successes. Something about auto successes, auto fails. Something about calling. Ooh. Maybe there's calling your shots, right? Maybe it's something to do with calling your shots, right? So this is, I mean, maybe this is in the way of risk, but maybe it's something like, I don't know how this fits into faith, right? We have to think about that. But maybe we think about those, if we're still using D6, maybe it's ranges, right? Ranges of guesses where you can do something like, you know, you choose a number and say if the roll is higher or lower, right? And so going to be, right? The roll is going to be higher or lower. And we already know that we're using 2d4, 2d6, 2d8, 2d10. So maybe there's a reference chart. Reference chart with three number or with number ranges per each, right? And then what you're doing is, like, if for instance it was 2d4 and you're like, I'm going to choose that it's going to be a 3 or higher, or if it's 2d10 and you're like, I think it's going to be a, you know, 3 or higher, that's a low, you're not really showing a lot of faith, you know, that you're believing in your god or deity. So that's a low faith guess. So maybe the benefit of that is low, right? Whereas if you're like, I think it's going to be, you're rolling, you know, 2d6 and you're like, it's going to be a 9 or higher. And it's like, all right, chances of that are a lot, you know, less. Now, would people just learn the math behind it and guess it? Sure. Is it still fun? Probably, right? And so then maybe there are different benefits behind how much faith you're putting into your situation. So now maybe it's like if you can actually guess, for instance, I think it's going to be Snake Eyes, on 2d6, and it is, then there is a massive boon that you're gaining. So maybe this is fun. Maybe there's some sort of I kind of like this one. I don't know how that would work. I don't know. And then maybe what happens is that this is the mechanic, but this faith resource, that turns it. This faith resource is, can I curve this? I can't really curve it. This faith resource ends up being like, oh, I can curve it a little bit. Oops. Let's do this. No, get out of there. See, this faith resource ends up being, in essence, like how you can manipulate the die roll, right? So you can say, I think it's going to be Snake Eyes, and you've got 3 faith resources, so you can actually potentially modify the die to change it. So then faith as a resource will modify the die rolls, right? So then you can actually use the faith resource. So then we have to think about how you build up faith. So then maybe faith is built up with team misses, or maybe it's built up some other way. And then when you build up faith, you can use it to manipulate your die calls when you're doing these called shots. Now, the big question is, how often is this happening? How often are you calling a shot? Every turn? That would be maybe once a round you get to do it in a scenario. I don't know. That's my thought. All right, now final one. We're getting at 30 minutes, so this is getting long. The final one is the, in essence, the talent, which is like a warlock, wizard, and a sorcerer. And this one's weirder. And so this one's weirder. This one would be, in essence, like, my idea is that you have this circle, and you have multiple circles, right? I have no idea this is going to work, but I have this vision for it, right? And so hear me out. And then each one of these circles, oh God, what did I do? Each one of these circles has like lines on it, like areas around, right? So I'm going to really need to get visual help from other people, that's for sure. And then you have this one's got lines around it. They're probably not as many. They're probably a little bit more evenly spaced. And then you have the center one. And my thought here is, I don't know how this works 100%, but when you think about magic as schools, I'm thinking that it's going to be, so I'm making weapons on separate like cards that you would have. I don't like to have, I'd like to have everything on the character sheet, but right now I'm using weapons as tactics, and you have separate cards. So as an idea is like, for instance, this would be a strategy card, and that strategy card for this warrior is Hand, Axe, and Shield. And Hand, Axe, and Shield then gives you certain abilities that you would have access to if you have that as your strategy. And so a warrior might have like, 3 cards. Maybe they're all available and one's active and the other ones aren't. So they're switching weapons, they're switching strategies, right? They go from Hand, Axe, and Shield to 2 hand axes, right? Or and now that gives you different options and powers, right? And so that to me I think is interesting. And so I was not going to do that for Magic. I was going to do for Magic more sort of like Vagabond Alpha, not Alpha because Alpha's now, but the original Vagabond where you're kind of constructing an ability. But now I'm thinking that you're going to have the style of magic here. So say this is like mixed elemental. I'm just putting mixed elemental because I think that there might be one that's like fire specific and it does something else, right? So who knows? So you have mixed elemental. And then maybe on here there's like different colors, right? So you've got like red X, orange X, yellow X. I don't know. Hear me out here. Green X. I'm going to give you the idea of, in essence, what I'm wanting, right? So my thought would be that this is like a rondelle, I think that's what it's called, where you have a token and it's moving across, right? And it's moving in a circle around this. Now, there would be colored combinations here where these would be different colors, but then on top of that, I thought that it would be really cool if the different subclasses of mage had different ways of getting from this rung to the next rung, right? And in essence, in my head, is that out here as you're going around, you're going to get access to different color patterns or in essence, spell abilities that are not as potent. And if you get into the next rung, it becomes more potent. And if you get into the center, you can pretty much just construct whatever the hell magic power you want with that card. And there'll be examples on there. And maybe it's like, for this mixed elemental, red is like a DD, or orange is a cone, or I don't know. I have no idea yet. And so then you, in essence, what you as a wizard or a mage or as a talent in essence are doing is that you're trying to manipulate this token around this circle and push it down into other levels and move it back up. And you can push it down, but it might cost like a resource to just move it immediately down, or you'll be able to make things happen. Like you could say, I want it to be here, but if you're in the wrong spot to get there, that means it's just costing you a lot to do that, whether it's taxing you physically or mentally or whatever. There could be a consequence of some sort, but you can do it. I also like the idea that depending on your subclass, your token starts in a different location. And depending on your subclass, there are different accesses down here that they have, or different ways of manipulating this. Like, I like the idea of that the image here is the same no matter what. There are different potential starting points depending on the subclass. And I like the idea that depending on the subclass, you might have access to something else down here, right? Now, what would I like to be able to get out of this? I'd like to be able to get out of this the concept that you are, in essence, tapping into what energy is available to you to be able to do things. And you're manipulating that in some way. So the spark, for instance, which is much more like a sork, they might have multiple rungs here that allow them to get down into this deep power, right? Because they are explosive. And so they might have multiple rungs to get in here. The conduit might be able to do things that, or if that's more like your warlock, there might be ways that they more easily pay to move around quicker. I don't know. And then maybe the more wizardy type, which in this system is the shaper, is going to be able to pick where they get to start at the beginning of an encounter. Like they're a little bit more of, think about a wizard, they're the ones that are prepared. So maybe they can start somewhere here, or maybe they can actually choose to start somewhere in here, or like they would have more choice to begin with. The spark, which is like a sork, would be explosive, going in and out, constantly kind of moving in and out quickly. And maybe there's another rung here. Maybe this isn't the perfect image of what this would look like. And then the conduit they could pay more resources in ways to manipulate this in some way. And so it might be that there's another rung. It might be that it's, even bigger in terms of how this thing looks. And so you've got something like so. And then there's another whole rung out here of sorts, right? So then it's more fun to move in and out of. And my thoughts would be that these colors that exist here are going to have to do, like, the card, that being on different colors gives you access to the different types of manipulations of spells, meaning the range, the damage, the area, the effect, right? Meaning like what it does to, like, effect in this sense, like manipulation of people and battlefield, right? So these different things are manipulated by the different colors, and it might be that out here that you're only really affecting one of these. And then in here, you're now able to affect 2 of these. And in here, you're really affecting a ton. And then here, you can just do whatever the hell you want, right? It's like if you can get into the center, it's like your big, I'm going to do something massive. Now, doing whatever you want still falls within the confines of what the card is. So, for instance, when I think of, I said mixed elemental, but when I think of like elemental savant, maybe we'll call it, versus like a pyro, the elemental savant is able to manipulate all 4 types of elements, so they might not have some big fireball-esque type ability, right? Whereas the pyro, they probably do. So there might be some keywords or something on here. So anyways, those are the 4 mini games that are in my brain right now. We'll see what you think. Leave some comments. Join the Discord. Let me know in there. Hit the bell, hit the subscribe, and I hope to talk to you guys soon.